Life only exists within boundaries. The habitat and lifespan of every type of organism are basically finite and limited. Only space and time extend infinitely. The history of life on Earth has always been the history of interaction between creatures and their environment. Over a period of hundreds of millions of years, different organisms came into existence, adapted their environment, and lived in harmony with it. This continued until man destroyed the ecological balance of his environment and limited its natural ability to self-regulate by his constant intervention in the Earth's biotope. Even the human body, the refuge of many beneficial biotopes, did not remain unaffected by this. The oral cavity forms the border area between the environment and the organism. It is the gateway for food, the outpost of the immune system, and above all, a complex environment, a biotope inhabited by countless microorganisms. Microorganisms certainly played no part in the world of barbers, tooth extractors, and surgeons of the Middle Ages, except perhaps in the form of toothworms, which they blamed for causing tooth decay. A medieval pharmacopoeia therefore recommended, among other things, to tackle the toothworms with a hash made from roast hare head and finely chopped female pubic hair. If this medicine didn't work, as was to be expected in the majority of cases, the tooth extractor had to put his skills to the test. Onlookers observed with malicious pleasure the failures of professional quacks, which were often caused by an ignorance of anatomy. Yet, even at the time, there were remarkably detailed descriptions of the oral cavity and its macroscopic elements. Nowadays, we not only know more about microorganisms, teeth, oral mucosa, and saliva. We also know that they are closely connected with one another in a complex, effective structure, that is the ecosystem, and that all the elements interrelate. At first glance, such diverse ecosystems as mudflats with their extensive microfauna, marshlands which are impressive because of their varied flora, high moors which are dominated by peat moss, and the human oral cavity all have one thing in common, that is, the same basic rules always apply. The harmony of a biotope remains intact as long as there is ecological balance. The oral mucosal microbiotope is covered with a film of saliva, which is approximately 100 microns thick and contains glycoprotein. It is an effective protective layer for the mucosa and at the same time a source of food for many germs in the oral cavity. Histologically, the mucosa consists of a multi-layered squamous epithelium and an underlying connective tissue, the lamina propria. When comparing the buccal mucosa above with the gingival mucosa below, the difference in the keratinization of the mucosal surface is very obvious. The multi-layered squamous epithelium of the gingiva is keratinized to varying degrees on the surface and is thinner than the epithelial layer of the buccal mucosa. At the end of the connective tissue cones are simple or complex nerve ends, which react to sensations of heat, cold, touch, or pain. At the dento-gingival junction, the non-keratinized marginal epithelium seals the periodontal ligament from the oral cavity by forming a strong bond at the enamel. Teeth are very important in the biotope of the oral cavity, not only because dentists and patients spend more or less a lifetime dealing with them, but because changes in and around the teeth also lead to changes in existing biotopes and the creation of new ones. The tooth surface is also covered in a film of saliva containing glycoprotein. This mainly acts as a protective layer for the dental enamel, though it also provides an attractive area on which bacteria can settle. Saliva not only forms a diffusion barrier to prevent acids penetrating, but also a boundary to prevent minerals escaping. Certain select areas play a special role in the ecosystem. These areas include fissures, fossae, proximal areas which are difficult to reach, overhanging filling and crown margins, as well as the cervical area of the tooth and the gingival margin. Microbiotopes develop in these niches due to the anatomical conditions and resulting poor hygiene. Saliva is one of the most important factors for maintaining the ecological balance in the oral cavity and therefore for oral health. In addition to having extensive protective and regulatory functions, it also prepares food for digestion. Saliva consists mainly of water. Glycoproteins, collectively referred to as mucins, line the entire oral cavity with a thin film. Salival mucins protect the mucosa from dehydration and injury. They restrict penetration of the mucosa by irritant and carcinogenic materials. The mechanical rinsing effect of the saliva alone results in a considerable number of bacteria, including potentially dangerous bacteria, being constantly washed off the surface of the teeth and mucosa and swallowed. Certain components in the saliva congeal the bacteria or compete. Antibacterial components such as lactoferrins and lysozymes directly inhibit the reproduction of microorganisms. Various glycoproteins in the saliva can mask the cellular process of bacteria, normally used as a means of adhering to the tooth surface. The predominant specific antibodies in saliva are class IgA secretory immunoglobulins. They agglutinize bacteria and viruses, and their specific purpose is to protect the mucosa. The protective effect of saliva on the teeth begins during eruption of the tooth. In a process described as enamel maturations, ions of calcium, phosphate, magnesium and fluoride diffuse from the saliva into the superficial enamel layer. This increases its resistance to attack by acids. The mineral content of saliva is of fundamental importance throughout life for replacing minerals to areas which lose minerals during the course of day. Today, people no longer believe in toothworms. It is now known that microorganisms are completely normal inhabitants of the oral cavity. They do not leave any room for pathogenic germs and are therefore in part responsible for the ecological balance in this biotope and ultimately the health of the person. There is an incredible multitude of microorganisms and more than 300 types inhabit the oral cavity. About 30 of these are to be found there regularly. Bacteria dominate the healthy oral germ flora, though fungi and viruses are also present in smaller numbers. This spherical bacterium is known as coccus because of its outer form. It is approximately 1/1000th of a millimeter in size. As all medically significant types of coccus are non-motile, after cell division their characteristic patterns closely resemble one another. They occur in pairs as diplococci, for example as bacterial pneumonic pathogens, in chain forms as streptococci, for example as a contributing cause of caries, or bunched like grapes as staphylococci. A macroscopically visible colony grows from a single cell by continual division. A doubling of the genetic material precedes cell division. The cytoplasmic membrane and other components of the cell wall develop into a septum which divides the mother cell into two daughter cells.